everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Roald Dahl Retrospective, where we take a look at adaptations based off of Roald Dahl's books and shorts. I am Patricia.
And my name is Aaron.
So it's been a while since we've tackled in an adaptation based off of a Roald Dahl book. The last time that we did it was with Matilda the Musical, but this time around we are tackling not one, not two, not three, but four adaptations that came out exclusively on Netflix and was written and directed by Wes Anderson, the same person behind Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Yeah, I was gonna say I never heard of Netflix before. I mean, what's Netflix?
No, it's the bootleg version of it, alongside with Pulu and Paradont Plus. But I digress.
All
Anyways,
right.
so today we're going to be tackling in the first out of the four adaptations, which is The Wonderful World of Henry Sugar, which is based off of the short story of the same name that was written in 1977. So yeah, this is a 40-minute short. So it's a little bit different than all of the other films that we've seen throughout this retrospective, but it's actually really interesting because it plays off like if it was a stage production.
Well, here's the thing. So, if we go right into the style that Wes Anderson was trying to portray in regards to all these shorts, I mean, if you've seen Fantastic Mr. Fox, I think you're going to be right at home here. I think am I right
Yeah,
in saying that?
absolutely. Because the craftsmanships, the way that the sets are designed, the way that the characters talk to each other, it feels really align with Wes Anderson's style. So if you really love Fantastic Mr. Fox, then The Wonderful World of Henry Sugar and the three other shorts we're going to be talking about feel right at home. So yeah, let's start off with The Wonderful World of Henry Sugar. So the plot synopsis goes as this. So we have a rich man simply known as Henry Sugar who is wanting to be able to gain the ability to see without his eyes because he read it from a medical book. When he reads more about the story of how the man who is able to see without his eyes is able to gain that knowledge, he decides that instead of making millions upon millions of dollars through gambling and keeping it for himself, he's going to be able to use it to open up orphanages and open up hospitals for children. So, yeah, that's essentially what the short story is about. But let's talk about the way that it's portrayed. So, we have essentially a small cast of characters and they play multiple roles. For example, Benedict Cumberbatch is going to play as Henry Sugar, and he'll be playing as various other characters throughout the course of the four shorts. And we also have Dev Patel, we have Richard Ayoade, we have Ray Fiennes, we have Ben Kingsley. So we essentially have a small group of people who are playing as multiple characters. There's a lot of narration telling the story to us. Very little props. The sets are constantly moving and shifting, and we get different camera angles. We get different people coming in to give them the props and opening up doors like if you were to see in a stage play. So it plays off very similar to that. And it's very unique and something that we have never seen before in a Roald Dahl adaptation.
I guess if you had to make a crude description, if you've never seen any Wes Anderson material before, and you have to like make a crude description of like what we see here, do you remember the Old Spice commercials?
Yes.
Yeah, like look at me, and then look at you, like, and then like he's you see like everything moving around or everything, and then after that, like it's it goes to like the beginning, then you get the theme song at the end of it. So like it's sort of similar to that in a way, but I mean it's I would just say it's done far better in this situation than the Old Spice commercials, and for a lot longer period too. So,
Yeah, pretty much.
but the one interesting thing I like about this particular, at least a couple of shots we're going to talk about here. The last one is very different, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what they decide to do is he decides not to make this a widescreen production, which I think is very interesting. I mean, obviously the items at the very beginning, give you the instinct that you think this is going to be like a widescreen production. But no, he decides to do it in 4K on 3. Which I think is very unique because I mean it gives this kind of like very retro, very like old school kind of like feel to it. Like this is not something that took place, in modern times, which it isn't because the Henry Sugar took place like what was it, in the 70s? I think it
Yes.
was. Yeah, exactly. So I mean it is taking the 70s apparel, in regards to the costume design, in regards to the way it's designed, in regards to things like that. And by the way, everybody, this is not like the James James and the Giant Peach, 1976 thing that we reviewed before for the BBC. If you recall that
Yes, I
podcast,
recall that.
it's got far better production value than that. No peaches dressed as balloons or anything like that. Like so. Yeah, so don't let that put you off. It's so unique. Like it's a different type of style, which I don't think we've actually seen in a production for a very long while. I mean, there's been there's this one production which tried to capture all of that. It was about my film studies teacher showed me this movie, and as part of his thing, and I completely forgot. It's about two boys who find out that they're gay and then they're in a relationship, but then have to comprehend with all the problems at that time, and they put it all together in like this kind of like a very old retro type of environment, and I completely forgot what the name of that is. I'm sure someone's going to shout it out in the comments when I've described it, but anyway, if someone could shout it out in the comments, please let me know. It's such a long time ago since I've seen it, but it kind of reminds me of that. And so you've got it's not, this story does not take place in a modern setting. You've got the clothes are from that time period, the way that the production is of that time period. The only modern thing that you would say comes to that, I would say, is the way that the backgrounds all change, and it moves from side to side, and also it is the actors themselves are having to bring the scenery to life. When you really look at it, the scenery is very lifeless. It is like a stage play when you look at it, and then you see the stage all moving around, and the story and the life of the storytelling is told through the actors, and and even then they somehow get away with being pretty deadpan, but at the same time very intriguing all at the same time. It's wonderful how it's all done.
It's a slow burn. You really get invested on what's happening in the story. When you go from one chapter to another, you first start off with Henry Sugar, and he's just this rich, pompous guy who finds this book in the library. And then he reads about the story of how the man was able to see without his eyes. And then we see that story. But then we jump into another story about the man who sees without his eyes. How did he learn how to see without his eyes? So we jump in from one story to another story to another story, and then back to Henry Sugar. It could have been really confusing. It could have been all over the place, but instead it keeps to its focus, and it answers questions very slowly. You don't get all of it until a little bit later on, so you have to be invested in finding out what happens next. And it's really
before we keep this in mind, there is a lot of story that comes into this. You go from one story into a second story in the book to a third story that actually pads out the man who learned how to see without his eyes. There's a lot of storytelling in this. Keep this in mind, this is a 39-minute running time.
Yes.
For this sort of thing. It's amazing how much they've been able to do a lot of world building with very little. It's minimalist, but minimalist in the greatest of ways, because it's not about long-standing scenes or trying to establishing shots or anything like that. This is about the story, and the way that it's told.
Yes.
And I think that's what's fantastic about this whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So it starts off with Henry Sugar, and Henry Sugar reads the story about Imdan Khan, and then he learns the story about the great yogi. So we have Henry Sugar to Imdan Khan to the great yogi, and then back to Henry Sugar, and then a little bookend. We have Roald Dahl. That's right. Roald Dahl himself is portrayed in this movie for the very first time. Now, technically,
and portrayed by Ray Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes does
I think he does an incredible time.
Yeah, he does a fantastic job as playing as Roald Dahl. I mean, he looks like Roald Dahl. He acts like Roald Dahl. They even have him in the gypsy house sitting at the hut with his chair. Everything is so immaculate. You can tell that Wes Anderson did his homework, because we even went to the Roald Dahl Museum and we saw what his hut looks like. And we saw the gypsy house. We even saw the door of the gypsy house. Everything is immaculate. Everything from the little details to what was in his walls, to what was in his table, him eating the chocolate, him writing down in his notebook, the little heater in the background. Everything is correct to Roald Dahl standards.
Well, we didn't see the femur, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, we didn't. But no, but everything about his hut was absolutely correct. And also the story is accurate to the original short story that we saw in the movie. So again, great observation from Wes Anderson to essentially take the short and put it all together into 40 minutes as opposed to like stretching it for a long period of time like what he did with Fantastic Mr. Fox, where he just took maybe like 1/3 of the original source material and then mixed in a little bit of Danny the Champion of the World. But I think that he knew that the storytelling that he was going to portray was not going to sit for a mainstream audience for an hour and a half. That narration was probably going to make people tired. But I think that the right amount of time that they were able to have the lengths of these stories was absolutely amazing because we're able to enjoy the storytelling as it was told to us. We're able to see the set design, we're able to see the costumes, we're able to see how the actors were portraying as these characters. I think that it's done amazingly well. Yeah, so I think that the way that they were able to play with such a minimalist effort was also really good. I mean, we've always said less is more, and there's no better example than this. It's actually a bit of a question on which has the best set design in a Roald Dahl adaptation. And we've said, like many times about like how amazing things like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, and James and the Giant Peach, and even Fantastic Mr. Fox were great with its set design. But I would say that the Henry Sugar and the three shorts we're going to be talking about may be a contender for the best set pieces that we've ever seen in a Roald Dahl adaptation.
Well, it really depends. Like, keep in mind, like, Wes Anderson so far has probably only like done like, maybe like five, maybe six, like, Roald Dahl related things here in the Roald Dahl retrospective. So it's, I mean, so Wes Anderson has his own way of doing things, and for him, in the way that he tells his story, it works. I mean, in regards to all the other Roald Dahl stuff, I mean, there's reasons why they are produced in the way that they are. I mean, James and the Giant Peach, I'm not talking about, the 70s version, I'm talking about the Disney version. Like, it's, I mean, obviously it has that Disney, feel to it, and it has, the presentation that it has, because obviously that's the vision of the director. And this is, what happens, for our other Roald. It's not like there's not been like a standard that's been set, unfortunately. And I know I made an argument like, hey, in the Tom and Jerry, Willy Wonka, podcast, say, hey, look, there's a standard that's been set for Roald Dahl adaptations. But when you really look at, in regards to like what that standard is, I mean, it is high quality, but at the same time, when it's passed from like director to director, I mean, like Wes Anderson obviously was taking on like the entire Roald Dahl library. I mean, obviously it would be Wes Anderson's view on all this, but obviously it's not. I mean, obviously Tim Burton did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, we all know what Tim Burton's famous for. It is always that dark and crude and like, very like, very unwelcoming atmosphere that, he brings you in, and then but also not only that, it brings you this mystique that comes into it as well. So Wes Anderson doesn't do that in this movie. So all of them are all different, in
Yeah.
that regard. So.
Yeah, and Danny DeVito, the way that he was able to do his cinematography and his directing was he made it look like it was in the perspective of a child. So there was a lot of low angles, there's a lot of high angles that makes it look like there's something really, really tall or really, really short. With Henry Selick, when he did James and the Giant Peach, he was trying to emulate what he learned in Nightmare Before Christmas, where he was able to mix in the stop motion with the puppetry and the animatronics, and then eventually go over to live action where it does feel very Disney-esque while mixing in with the Roald Dahl story. So yeah, I would say that every single one of them has their distinct style of their directing. As for which of these directors captured the essence of Roald Dahl the best, I guess that's a bit of a debate. I will give it that. But
That's
Wes
a podcast
Anderson,
in itself.
yeah,
I mean,
that's a discussion in
the one
itself.
thing I will definitely say is that I think Danny DeVito and Wes Anderson, I think I would say probably have it right, because you can see some similarities in the way that they also do, because keep in mind, Danny DeVito tells it as like, hey, this is a story that happened, a long time ago, and this is me narrating the story. And in a way, that's what Wes Anderson does in these shorts. He does sort of like narration as well, but the narration comes through the actors. It doesn't come from him.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, even though that Danny DeVito's character was not the same in Matilda, where we have the narrator and then we have Mr. Wormwood, it wasn't exactly the same character, which I did complain about in our Matilda discation.
Well, I'll safely say this is better than when Chris Rock did it with The Witches.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think we can all agree on that.
That is true. Yes, him and also the narrator behind Roald Dahl's Little Red Riding Hood are tied as for the worst narrators that we've ever had in a Roald Dahl adaptation. I do agree on that. Anyway, beside the point, Wes Anderson does a fantastic job in directing Henry Sugar and the three other shorts that we're going to be talking about. So, is there any other thing that we have to say about Henry Sugar right before we move on to the three shorts?
Well, I mean, we can talk about the actors that's coming because David Tennant obviously is front and center of all of this, and
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch. I do apologize. I don't know why I keep calling David
Yeah,
Tennant.
I wish
I
that
do.
David Tennant would have been in this one. That would have been awesome.
Yeah, but Benedict Cumberbatch, I think he's front and center in all of this, and I think he does a fantastic job
He does a
in
great
all of this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
you
do
believe
agree.
you believe this guy is Henry Sugar in all of
Yes.
it.
And also Ray Fiennes knocked it out of the park as Roald Dahl. It's
He's
actually funny.
eerily is Roald Dahl when you
He
really think
is.
about it. You look at him, he's like, oh my god, is that him?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's like this. Wow, this the same guy who played as Voldemort in the Harry Potter movies was able to play as Roald Dahl. That's
Well,
amazing.
I guess he isn't a stranger to like putting on makeup and like dressing himself up with like different type of characters. He's a lot like Johnny Depp in a way, like how he's so adaptable to like doing different types of things. Like you see Johnny Depp like one day he's a pirate, and next thing he's a gangster, and here we got Ray Fiennes. He's like one day he's like this evil overlord, and then he's Roald Dahl.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Ray Fiennes was originally going to be Miss Trunchbull in the Matilda the Musical adaptation that we talked about last year, but then it was given over to Emma Thompson. And yeah, I
Emma
think,
Thompson did a better job, in my opinion.
yeah,
She's one of the. I mean, there's been lots of Miss Trunchbulls in like all sorts of productions, and I think Emma Thompson, give her credit, she does a really good job with
yeah,
this.
I do agree. Even though that in the musical, I know traditionally it's usually a man who plays as Miss Trunchbull, but you know what? I'm glad that we got the choices that we got. And Emma Thompson did fantastic as Miss Trunchbull, as we talked about last year, and Ray Fiennes did an amazing job as Roald Dahl. In fact, if there ever is a movie that is featuring about Roald Dahl's life, Ray Fiennes should play as Roald Dahl. I mean, just give it to him already.
Oh yeah, I mean, like it's him. It's like, but unfortunately, like I mean, Ray Fiennes, will he? I could hear the discussion in the boardroom already. It's like Ray Fiennes, Roald Dahl, document, docudrama, things like that. Well, I mean, like, would that fly, or would we want to go with a better actor? And sorry, more well-known actor, if you will. I was looking for an Academy Award. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So it's like, no disrespect to Ray Fiennes. I think he would have fantastic the thing is Roald Dahl. But unfortunately, like, I could just hear the discussions already, like, amongst the executives who don't know any better, you know.
Mm, fair
So,
enough. Anyway, so yeah, overall, I have to say that Henry Sugar is really, really good. I really like the presentation. The acting is fantastic. The way that they were able to tell the story was really, really clever. And overall, I think that it's a great package. If you have 40 minutes to spare on Netflix, do give yourself a watch on Henry Sugar.
oh yeah, definitely. It's like, I mean, there is a lot of people out there saying, for you, and this is actually the line on Wikipedia right now. The wonderful story of Henry Sugar receives critical acclaim for its craftsmanship, direction, performance, and faithfulness to its source material. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, so let's go over the other three shorts. Now, these, unlike Henry Sugar, are each 17 minutes long. Even though that they're a lot more condensed, they have really interesting stories for you to invest yourself in. And unlike Henry Sugar, these stories are really dark, like some of the darkest that we've ever seen in this retrospective.
Well, I
So,
mean, if you're a stranger to Roald Dahl, you'll probably be creeped out. But anyone here who's probably very familiar with Roald Dahl, as me and Patricia are, I think you know what you're in for.
yeah, I do agree. All right, so the first one that we saw was the rat catcher. The plot goes like this: a rat eradicator who looks like a big rat comes up with a cunning plan to gain the rat's trust to better exterminate the rodents. The presentation on this one is really, really fascinating. We have Ray Fiennes, Richard Ayoade, and Rupert Friend who come in and they portray as these characters that we see throughout the course of this story.
And by the
And
way, what's Ray Fiennes playing? The Rat Man of all
the
people.
Rat Man, yes, he is the
Who
Rat
else
Man.
he is?
Yeah, and oh my gosh, Ray Fiennes does an amazing job as the Rat Man. He is so captivating. The fact that he's able to tell these really intricate ways of how he's able to gain the rat's trust and get rid of them. And you have the two gentlemen who are just looking at him is like, wow, this guy is really, really weird. I think that the story is able to become just so compactful in just less than 20 minutes.
By the way, if you don't know who Richard is in all of this, if you're familiar with the It Crowd and The Watch, The Double, and Submarine, that's where he's from.
Yes,
So he's
and
that
we
guy.
and we even talked about Richard Ayoade last time, if you remember, when we did the bad guys discussion, where he played as the good guy. Tune into our podcast to find out more information. So
Oh yeah,
yeah,
he's a great voice actor, by the way. Like, I
yes.
like to see him in other stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah, he's really, really great. Anyway, but yeah, once again, Ray Fiennes is the highlight of this entire thing. He just does an amazing job of just creeping you out with the way that his costume looks, with the black eyes and the teeth and the sharp claws, and the way that he's dressed, and the way that he's able to just creep along and walk without making a single sound. It is just eerie to look at.
But like I love how he like brings you into like this uncomfortableness of like the character, which is like but at the same time he makes you more intrigued. Like, what's this guy's background? Like, what made him like want to catch rats in the first place? What wanted why does he want to be like a human rat in a way? Like these uncomfortable things. But the problem is like it's not uncomfortable with the fact that you don't want to watch it. You just kind of feel more hooked to the story because you're more intrigued about like where this guy's background goes, which is great character development. That's far more better than some other character development we've seen in bigger productions, if
Mm-hmm.
you will. Like, I mean, there's stuff like this should be studied. In my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, like, there is this really strange character, and he's got this really crazy story about like he's a rat catcher and like he catches rats like all over the place, and he even acts like a rat in order to be able to play his craft. And you're just in. It's not like a character that you should be repulsed by. It's a character that you should be intrigued by. And so there's stuff like this. This is great, example of how you take a character and he may look be unlikable, but then you use certain little bits to like bring him further into they bring the audience members further in to why you want to concentrate on this guy and why he's got a really interesting story to tell. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
brilliant.
It is brilliant. Yeah. It is a fantastic short. And again, for only 15 minutes, they were able to do a lot. The storytelling, and even though that the set design is very minimalist, it's literally only just the news station, the mechanic shop, and you have the field, which kind of looks like that hut that we saw when we were into Stonehenge, if you remember. That, and also there's like a sewer pipe. But that's it. That is literally all what the set is, and they're able to play a lot with it.
Yeah, and on top of that, like they don't just like use the set. I mean, I like how like basically they use like Wayside Garage. Like I thought they should have like done like a cheeky like nod to like Danny the Champion of the Work and you use the Red Garage in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. But
Yeah, that would have been
oh,
funny.
that would have been interesting, cameo. But obviously they didn't want to do that. But the one thing I do like about it is like it's not just about the minimal stage that they use. They also use the lighting as well, like to build the tension. Like so, I mean, there's the bit where like he's looking to kill the rat without using his hands, and yeah, they do that through building the tension. By the way, there's actually some stop motion in all this as well. So is obviously a nice little nod to. Is it a nice little nod to Fantastic Mr. Fox? I don't know, but it's I mean obviously it's a Wes Anderson production, so obviously there's got to be some stop motion somewhere here, there, and everywhere, if you
Sure.
will. But I mean, so the great thing that they do is that they bring down the light to like bring in like the tension between the rat catcher and the rat about how he's going to basically kill it without obviously using his hands. What's he going to do? And obviously there's a very disgusting conclusion to that whole showdown, which we won't spoil here. But the great thing of like doing that is that they build up that tension when not changing any scenery or like doing anything particularly like creative with the camera. If anything, it's just like up close shots and it's just them in the dark with like spotlights, if anything. But it's done so well that it really does like bring you in, or like what's going to be the conclusion to how is he going to do this and everything. I think it's fantastic doing it the way that they've done this.
I agree. All right, so with that out of the way, we should talk about the second short that we saw, and it was The Swan. So we have an intelligent boy who's known as Peter Watson, and he is tormented and bullied by two boys. And oh wow, this one was probably the darkest out of the three that we saw.
The one thing that really irked me is that apparently at the very end they said apparently this was based on like a true event,
Yeah.
which is like, huh? It's like,
Yes.
oh, that the very ending made me feel very uncomfortable on that
Yeah,
in that.
so
But
yes, it was apparently based off of a true event that Roald Dahl saw on a newspaper one day. He clipped it up and he saved it, and then 30 years later, he decided to adapt it into one of his short stories.
hmm
Yeah.
And for those of you who do not know, Rupert Friend is the narrator in all of this, and he was in Pride and Prejudice. He was also in The Death of Stalin, and also in Hitman Agent 47. But the less we say about that, the better.
Yeah. So essentially he is basically the adult version of the main character, and he is telling the story about his experience of when he was a young boy and when he was tormented by these bullies. He was just like enjoying seeing this nice little woodpecker, and then they essentially decided to just capture him because the boys wanted to shoot the woodpecker because they were collecting all of these birds, and they just want to be able to flaunt out that they were able to do so. They capture him, they tie him up, and then at first they decided that, oh, we're just going to continue tormenting him. And then each of the torments that they do gets worse and worse and worse until eventually he is just laying there, a shell of his former self. So, yeah, the story is essentially about the death of innocence and youth.
Yeah, it is very uncomfortable to watch. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I think out of all of them, I think this was my least favorite.
Mm. Yeah, it was pretty uncomfortable to look at. And not to say that, it wasn't done really well like the other shorts. It was. I thought that the performance was really well done, just like the others. The sets was also really well done like the others. But I think
Well,
that
if
it's
you notice, in order to basically be able to make the effect, you got like, they got the two bushes and also you've got like the rows of corn. And the only way they could really make that work is that they had to get like rid of the 4:3 standard and they had to like, widen the screen a little bit in order to like take that all in. Not to say that, that's a nitpick of a criticism, I have to say. It doesn't really like the one thing I would say, it doesn't really uniform with like, all the other shorts that we'd seen. Well, so what they had to do with this short is that they had to widen the screen in order to bring in like the effect of the swan. And the one way I would compare it to is that, do you remember when the Super Nintendo and the N64, how they would mimic widescreen and also like standard screen as well, where they would like kind of like put like the width of the screen like in between, so like it didn't look too stretched and it didn't look too like squashed at the same time.
yes.
And so he's like, I think they kind of like, it kind of feels like they're kind of doing that in a way, but obviously you can tell that it's not, which I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but that's kind of like how I see it in a way.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I guess they had to do it a little bit widescreen in certain scenes, like when you have Peter laying down on the railroad tracks, or when they're looking at the swan, or the scene in which he's climbing up the window. I mean, the willow tree, or the other scene that happens toward the end, which of course we're not going to spoil it. But yeah, basically, I can understand why they had to cheat around with that, because even though that it doesn't use as much of the set compared to the other shorts, they still had to tell the story in a way that they needed to show off more of the scenery.
yeah, don't get me wrong. Like it's a small criticism, but I mean, but to be honest with you, like you just the uncomfortableness of like the shot, like and the conclusion of it as well is like yeah, it's I can get what they're going for here. It's like one of those like make you think, it's like kind of like shorts really, but yeah, it still has a pretty grim ending to it.
It does have a
Pretty much.
very, very grim ending. And I understand what the message that Roald Dahl was trying to get across is that childhood innocence, which I guess I can kind of see with giving his backstory where he had to go through a lot as a kid. We talked about this in Roald and Beatrix about where he lost his father and his older sister at a very young age. And then there was World War II that broke out, and then he, lost his daughter, and his son was in a severe car accident, and also his first marriage had failed spectacularly, and then he had his second marriage and all that stuff. So I get that Roald Dahl went through a lot of stuff, but just looking at it on the screen, it's, oh man, it just makes you wonder. It's like, yeah, I mean, I get that this is one of the shorts that were geared towards adults and not for children, but yeah, it does make you feel like a little bit uncomfortable when looking into it.
Yes, it's a long way away from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. So, give this a fair warning to those who are a little bit more sensitive. So, viewer discretion is advised for this particular short.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna go into our last short, which is Poison, and this was published in 1950 in Collider's magazine. So this is focusing on two characters, Harry Pope and Timber Woods. Harry has a crate, which is an Asian snake around his stomach, and so Timber, who is trying to fetch a doctor so that he can be able to give him some help so that they can be able to get the snake out of it. Right before he bites him, and then eventually, he gets killed off instantly. So, yeah, this is a really intense story. And this is another example very similar to the rat catcher, in which is a very slow burn. So, Benedict Cumberbatch comes back again as the character who has the snake on him. And we have Dev Patel back as his friend. And Ben Kingsley returns again as the doctor. So, it's essentially these three characters who are playing in this story.
Yeah, and I mean Ben Kingsley obviously was in the first shot to begin with, and so so it's interesting. It's great to see him back again, and also Benedict Cumberbatch also comes back with it like this finale. And the one thing I would say about this shot is that it's a good story, and obviously it's taking place at a time when obviously the British Raj was like in charge, and so there is this feeling of supremacy between those who are currently in India, from Britain, and obviously there's the population of people that are there that are just seen as less of them, even though they've done extraordinary things for the people who are there, who are basically ruling over them at that point. And so you get to see that as in the climax of the ending of it all. The doctor does so much, and puts in so a lot of preparation in order to save this man's life. And when it turns out that I mean, obviously I won't try and spoil it, but after what happens at that he massively overreacts, and he obviously goes into a bit of not it's actually not like a racial tirade or anything like that, but you can see that he is obviously going to insult him for trying to help him in that. And obviously then he the doctor leaves in a huff and everything, and rightly so, pretty much. And so I think it's a very good period piece. I think for telling this story about a guy who believes that he has a snake that's slithered into his pajamas whilst he was sleeping.
Yeah.
So.
And of course, you have the tension that is building up where literally he is not able to move because there's a snake on him. And so they try everything that they can so that they can be able to get rid of it. You have the scene in which they give him the antidote first, then you have the scene in which they have the chlorophyll so that they can be able to knock out the snake and make it a little bit more cooler. So, yeah, you have all of these things happening, and you're just wondering, oh man, is he going to get bitten by the snake? What's going to happen? He has to stay perfectly still. He can barely talk. He's twitching, and he's like moving slightly back and forth with his eyes and his mouth. So then when you find out what happens in the end, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that
But
build
again, we
up.
don't want to spoil it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I would say that we do get to see that progression of the slow burn once again, very similar to the rat catcher. And yeah, I would say that it doesn't really pay off as well compared to the rat catcher, but it does have a different
Well,
ending.
here's the thing. It does have I don't I don't really if you want to call it a payoff, if you will, but I mean it is a good indication of where it does really give you an impactful ending, pretty much. So it is still worth in that regard. The one thing I will say is that I mean Poison I think does a fantastic job of building tension in that. This is the thing I think a theme that we seem to be getting in shorts, here is a short about building a character, here is a short about building tension, here is a short about just a story within a story. And I think one thing I think that Wes Anderson I think is trying to prove to everybody is that you can take one aspect of what makes a production great, and then you can make a really good go at that, and you can not only can you create a really good story or a great short out of this, you can also use it as an educational experience. So I think anybody who does film studies, I think anybody who does any type of like media, I think should really study these shorts. I really do, because I think it does such a great job in telling here's an aspect of a story and here's how you get towards the end of it. I
Yeah,
think
I
it does
do
fantastic.
agree.
I think it's fantastic, and so I would say Poison is probably like my maybe my second favorite. I think of all of that. I think the first favorite obviously is going to be the first one,
Yeah.
and I think that's my complete favorite, the Henry Sugar one. But obviously that's a bit unfair saying that obviously he gets like double the running time pretty much
Yeah,
to
I
kind
mean,
of deal
yes,
with
Henry
that.
Sugar
But
was definitely the best out of the shorts, but then again, of course, it's 40 minutes long, so it's able to take advantage of that. But I think that from listening to our discussions, I would say in terms of the three shorts, we have Poison, The Ratcatcher, and The Swan in our order of our favorites.
hmm
Yeah, so those are the ones that we would recommend that you go to first. So check out Henry Sugar, check out Poison, The Ratcatcher, and then The Swan for last. And like I said, if you're a little bit more sensitive, then I would just say be cautious when watching The Swan. All right, so that concludes our discussions of these four shorts in the Roald Dahl retrospective, which is going to be it's going to be a quite a long way considering that we have Wonka coming out, and that's going to be in December. So we got about a few months until we go over to our next discussion.
cool. But until then, thank you very much for listening.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Roald Dahl retrospective. Let us know in the comments below about out of the four shorts that were featured on Netflix, directed and written by Wes Anderson, which one was your favorite? Which one was your least favorite? And yeah, let us know about if you were to see Wes Anderson adapt any other short stories from Roald Dahl, what would you like to have seen? Do you want to see Ray Fiennes as Roald Dahl in a future biopic slash docudrama? All
I
right,
do.
me too.
He
Hollywood.
sold me on Roald Dahl. I do
Yes.
have to say.
Yes, seriously, Hollywood, get on that. All right, everyone. That's it. Hope to see you around soon and take care.
Bye bye.